I want to bring in NBC's Ryan Reilly. David Aronberg is state attorney for Palm Beach County, who knows and has worked with Pam Bondi. Melanie Zanona is senior congressional reporter for Punchbowl News and an MSNBC political contributor. And Mark McKinnon served as an advisor to George W. Bush and John McCain and is creator of The Circus. Good to see all of you. David, Donald Trump went with Gaetz because he wanted him to take a sledgehammer to the Justice Department. So obvious question is that who Pam Bondi is? We just heard her saying they need to clean house.
Chris, good to be with you. Trump was swinging for the fences when he chose Matt Gaetz, but Matt Gaetz couldn't get confirmed through the Senate, so he went with someone who could, someone who is not a revolutionary. I know she made that interview. She sometimes will engage in that political rhetoric, especially on Fox News. But it is the Pam Bondi I know who edited her comment midway through by saying the bad prosecutors. Who can be against bad prosecutors, right? I guess that's in the eye of the beholder. But I do know Pam Bondi to be someone who does abide by the rule of law, and she's tethered to the law. So I was very concerned when Matt Gaetz was appointed. Matt Gaetz would have torched the building. He would have gone after all of Trump's enemies. Pam Bondi, I think, will engage in the same type of John Durham-esque investigations that we saw under Bill Barr. But in the end, I don't think we have any real concern that Adam Schiff or Anthony Fauci is going to be perp-walked in an orange jumpsuit.
Okay, Ryan, fill people in on more of Pam Bondi's background. What should they know?
Yeah, I mean, I think, in addition to being the impeachment lawyer, she has been sort of this television presence to what you were saying at the top of the hour, sort of, introducing this. She had been a Fox News guest host, right? And she does make a lot of those appearances, as David just mentioned. So, I think one of the moments that really sticks out for me, though, is right after Donald Trump lost the 2020 election. She held that presser in downtown Philadelphia where she was being drowned out by Beyonce from protesters playing music in the background, and made these false claims and went and made those false claims again on television. Now, she sort of fell away from that effort to overturn Donald Trump's election loss in 2020 in the lead up to the Capitol attack. But, the reason that they had to have that press conference at Four Seasons Total Landscaping that some people may remember is because, she had that first press conference in Philadelphia and was spreading these lies. She claimed falsely that Donald Trump had won Pennsylvania, which he obviously did not. He lost Pennsylvania in 2020, and that all led up to the January 6th attack on the Capitol. So, Matt Gaetz was a lot more sort of in the middle and in the thick of that. He had direct relationships with January 6th rioters. But, she is definitely sort of, I think, in that world altogether. Although, obviously, I think there's a big sigh of relief within DOJ when you're comparing her to certainly Matt Gaetz.
Yeah, Melanie, definitely a sigh of relief within DOJ. But what's been the reaction among lawmakers to what has been a rapid turn of events?
Yeah, it was a huge sigh of relief for Republicans as well. I can tell you that. But look, I think with Matt Gaetz now dropping out of the nomination, there's going to be a reluctance to put up roadblocks, particularly for the next attorney general nomination. There's a lot of praise for Pam Bondi. She's a Trump loyalist. We should point that out. She's going to be an attack dog just like Matt Gaetz would have been. She doesn't have the baggage. And I also think it's worth noting here that now 3 of the people who were part of Donald Trump's defense team during his first impeachment have now been named to significant cabinet and administration roles within Donald Trump's new administration. Not just Pam Bondi, who's part of the legal team, but also Elise Stefanik and Lee Zeldin. They were both members of Congress at the time, and they were part of this sort of unofficial crew that was defending Trump during that first impeachment. But, I do think that now that Matt Gaetz is out of the way, it is going to put a spotlight on these other nominees who are just as controversial and problematic. There's a lot of concerns with Pete Hegseth and sexual assault allegations surrounding him, even though he has denied all wrongdoing. RFK, his controversial extreme views on vaccine, his pro-abortion rights support, which could be a problem with Republicans, and then Tulsi Gabbard, of course, who has spewed talking points that were propaganda from the Russian government. So that spotlight is going to shift. They've gone under the radar, so now it's going to be onto these next controversial nominees.
Well, David, the AP reports, and I want to talk just a little bit more about Pam Bondi. She was accused of bribery years ago because of a campaign donation she received from Donald Trump. What can you tell us about that? And do you see anything, though, I think to Melanie's point, and you touched on this earlier, anything that could be seriously problematic for her confirmation?
No, I think she's going to glide through, especially because she's the second choice. And I think she's popular amongst Republicans. Remember, Matt Gaetz was hated by Republicans. Tulsi Gabbard was a Democrat. And so their nominations are imperiled, but Pam Bondi will slide through. As far as the $25,000 check, I looked into that because when I spoke to her about it back in 2013, she referred me to a New York Times article that researched it and found that the check that Trump sent her was actually written and signed days before the article came out that informed Bondi and her team that there was an investigation going on at Trump University in New York. So there was no quid pro quo here. She also released 8,000 pages of documents that showed this was never discussed with Donald Trump. So, look, I admit that the timing of the check doesn't look good. But as far as whether there's any evidence of quid pro quo conduct here or bribery, there is none.
Mark, did you get a sense that this was a one-time show of opposition to a uniquely flawed candidate, or do you think it does tell us something more about Senate Republicans' willingness to stand up to Donald Trump?
Well, I don't think it was Trump's intent that this be a strategic route to Pam Bondi. I mean, I think he really wanted Matt Gaetz. But I think in the end, it's going to end up being very strategic because Pam Bondi now looks like a very reasonable choice. Had she been the first choice, she might have gotten more opposition and more criticism. But I think now she looks, compared to Gaetz, like a very reasonable pick. I mean, she's an actual lawyer. She's a former prosecutor, been elected statewide as Attorney General. So, you know, I think that it really paves the way for her nomination without a lot of flack, frankly, from either side of the aisle. And so I think that at the end of the day, the Matt Gaetz nomination clears the way for a lot of Republicans to say, okay, listen, we put a bullet in the bad guy. Now, I think it just paves the way and makes it easier for the other nomination.
So, David, you also know, I understand, Matt Gaetz. You folks in Florida know each other. And you heard what he had to say, you know, that they've dredged up these salacious, and I think he called them clickbaity allegations. Is he going to go away quietly, or is he already looking for his next gig?
Chris, he's running for governor in 2026, and it will be a crowded field.
So?
Oh, yeah. That's another reason why he's not going to go back to Congress. He could actually go back to the next Congress, but then they would release the ethics report. So he's not doing that. So he's going to run for governor, and he's going to claim to be a martyr. Keep in mind, the investigation of Matt Gaetz for child sex trafficking did not start under Merrick Garland. It was ended and dropped by Merrick Garland. It started under Bill Barr, you know, that liberal Antifa deep state guy. Yeah, so he started this investigation, and there was evidence there. But in the end, the Department of Justice found that there was not enough evidence to take down a sitting congressman because they would rely on the two key witnesses, Joel Greenberg, who's a walking criminal enterprise, and the 17-year-old girl who at the time had lied about her age to do a sugar daddy website profile. So they did not think that they were both credible enough to go after Matt Gaetz. It doesn't mean he was cleared. It doesn't mean he was exonerated. Just means they didn't have enough evidence to charge.
So, Melanie, let's go back to the conversation about the other folks who are out there. And I think that the names that have been mentioned are the ones, Hegseth, RFK, Gabbard. I just wonder what you're hearing on the ground. And is it clear that because of the most recent revelations against Pete Hegseth, he may be the one who may be in the most trouble? Or what are you hearing generally?
Yeah, he certainly seems to be the most problematic at this point, not just because of the sexual assault allegations that I mentioned, but he's also had some comments about saying he doesn't support women in combat. That could be a problem with Republican Joni Ernst, who's been very supportive of women in combat. And just more generally, I mean, he was a Fox News host, and I think there are very serious and legitimate questions about whether he's qualified to lead an agency as big and important, as complex as the Pentagon. So that's going to be a huge question. He's going to have to convince these senators in these meetings that he's up for the job. I do think, though, kind of big picture here, the natural deference that Republicans are going to want to give Trump. I mean, their natural posture is going to be they are going to want to defer to Trump generally. They're also not going to want to come out publicly at this point. There's no reason to come out publicly. We're still a few months away from these confirmation hearings. But according to my reporting, a lot of these conversations behind closed doors are basically telling these nominees like Pete Hegseth, listen, everything's going to come out. So you better be transparent with us. You better be prepared to have your entire political, personal lives opened up. You and your families are going to go through the ringer. So if this is something you are willing to do, you just have to keep that in mind. I think going forward, though, it is really going to ramp up the scrutiny on some of these other nominees that are quite controversial for Republicans.
So Mark, Gaetz going down, clearly a loss for Donald Trump, who, I don't know, 3 days ago, it was coming out from the transition team that he was working the phones hard. And obviously he sent his VP to the Hill to try to push him through. I wonder, though, if it's a loss for him, is it maybe a victory for Susie Wiles, who is pretty widely regarded as someone who's a little more moderate? She also, by the way, that the incoming chief of staff has extensive ties in Florida politics. She obviously knows Bondi. How do you view this in terms of the inner workings of the transition team and then obviously the administration?
I think it's a huge relief for everybody involved except for maybe Donald Trump, but especially Susie Wiles. I mean, that's a great point. I know her, and she is a consummate professional. She's very familiar with Bondi, and I think a big fan. So I think that they all see the Gaetz thing going down as a relief that he was kind of the piñata and get him out of the way, because they know that it was probably unlikely in the end that he was going to be confirmed, and it could have been